This week, Conflict Zone is at the US Army's Hohenfels training area in Bavaria. Our guest is Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, commander of some 30,000 US soldiers in Europe, with a such controversial commander-in-chief in Washington. Many people in Europe are wondering, is America still a reliable partner? General Ben Hodges, welcome to Conflict Zone.
Thank you, Michel.
Republican Senator Bob Corker, head of the Foreign Relations Committee of the US Senate, said President Donald Trump threatens other nations in such a way it could lead to a third world war. Do you agree?
Well, of course, as a soldier, my job is to make sure that our soldiers are as well prepared as they can be for whatever contingency should arise. Our focus is on deterrence and working as part of the alliance, the most successful alliance in the world, in the history of the world. So,
but Senator Bob Corker said, if we want to speak more about this quote, that the President of the United States is today more a danger than a help for peace. I mean, again, Donald Trump threatens other nations in such a way it could lead to a third world war. Do you agree with that?
I think that the President has done everything that the previous administration said it was going to do. The President, this administration, has lived up to every commitment as far as the alliance goes, and that's what I'm focused on. Rotational forces, preposition equipment, enhanced forward presence, that's all part of deterrence. And I think strong deterrence, strong alliance, that reduces the chance of a war.
Quite often President Trump uses Twitter. In an interview with German's FAZ newspaper, you said, quote, "Don't judge us by what the president tweets, about what else?"
I would say, as our Secretary of Defense has said, watch what we do. And again,
yeah, but again, we can watch what the American army is doing, but the tweets of the presidents are more than only having a nice time. There is a content in the tweets.
Yeah. Well, I actually don't know how to tweet. I don't have a Twitter account, so I wouldn't be the expert on that.
Do you want me really to believe that as an answer and to say, fair enough? You don't know what the president is tweeting?
I don't follow Twitter. I don't know.
So why did you say, don't judge us by what the president tweets? You had a concern to say something like that.
Yeah, because I think it's important to watch what the United States does. And when the United States is serious about something, we put soldiers on it, we put money on it, and that's exactly what's happening here in Europe.
General, President Trump tweets a lot, including foreign policy and also military issues.
Well, I get my orders through a military chain of command, and of course the President is our Commander-in-Chief, but that's not how we issue orders over...
I don't speak about orders. I speak about his opinions, about all the things he is in communication with the world. And these things are also connected to your job.
Well, my experience over the last several months is that all of our allies have taken a look. As they've made an adjustment to a new administration, they see what we're doing. And so I hear almost zero concern from any of our allies anymore about, is the United States committed in Europe, because they see what we are doing. And again, that's the manifestation of U.S. policy, is what we're doing, and that's what I'm concerned about.
This is an understanding which is one possibility to see the word. The other one is still that he is the commander-in-chief. He is also then your commander-in-chief. And again, he's called Kim Jong-un, the North Korean leader, quote, "little rocket man." He said he was short and fat. Do you think this is a language a president has to judge or to speak about other leaders in the world?
Well, Michel, of course, it's not my place to criticize any elected civilian official or to comment on how they do things. What I care about is our president's commitment to the alliance and making sure that our soldiers have everything that they need to do their job. And that's what I'm focused on.
Senator Corker went even so far as to say that the White House was an adult daycare center. How appropriate is it for the President of the United States, and I have to ask it the last time, but I have to do it,
Okay.
to communicate like this? I mean, you are a general, you have soldiers. Imagine you communicate like that. You are a role model. President Trump is a role model also for your soldiers. Do you think that his language is responsible?
I can tell you that every soldier takes an oath to the Constitution of the United States. And in that oath it says, obey the orders of the President of the United States, who's our Commander-in-Chief. I'll also say that I'm very glad that I am here in Hohenfels, Germany at a training area and not involved in the other types of that sort of news.
I would like to move on to Russia. Is Russia currently a security threat for the U.S.?
Sure it is. Russia is the only other nation that possesses the ability, not necessarily the will, but the ability to destroy the United States or all the other members of the alliance. And their behavior over the last 3 years, since they invaded Ukraine, has raised the concern of everybody, including all members of the alliance, all members of the European Union. And it's the kind of thing that I think nobody wants it. Conflict is not inevitable. We all want Russia to be a part of the responsible community of responsible nations again. Not with their current, they're not on the right path, not right now. We would like to see them back on the path of responsible behavior as a great power. I mean, it's a great nation, great people, great history, so many places where we could cooperate with them.
But they don't cooperate with you anymore.
Well, they've not lived up to any agreement that they've signed, including Minsk and other treaties, unless you really put pressure on them to do that.
That's a good point, because shortly after President Trump took office, you said, quote, "The Russians only respect strength." What exactly do you mean by this?
The Russians, I believe, will use every means at their disposal to achieve whatever their strategic objectives are. What they are concerned about, or what they fear, is a unified alliance and a unified European Union that sticks together. We had this throughout the Cold War, where you had hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers, Soviet troops across the inter-German border from each other.
Do you need more soldiers in this area?
And when we had that Cold War days, we still were able to play hockey. We still had trade. You still had cultural exchanges. You still had cooperation in different areas.
That's history. Today, do you need more soldiers?
We need the same effect. We
How,
need the same
how
effect.
do you want to work out that?
So one thing is continue to improve our cooperation with allies. And I see Germany in particular as being a leader, increasing its military capability, providing leadership in the alliance as well as in the European Union. These are all things.
But this is not a compensation for these times you were just describing. That sounds good, and it's certainly something very constructive, but it is not a compensation.
Well, sure it is. Germany, so important, not just in Europe, but in the world, for so many, from so many perspectives, economics, military. Germany has has earned a moral authority that's respected around the world. So German leadership is a very important part of this deterrence. The fact that Germany was the leader, along with France, in crafting the Minsk agreement. The fact that Germany is helping to keep the European Union sanctions in place against Russia until they live up to Minsk.
But
this is a very important
let's
part.
come back to the question. Are you satisfied with the strength of your current military assets?
I have never met any military commander that is satisfied with what he has.
After saying this, let's continue. Are you
Okay.
satisfied or not?
So let me say it this way. I am confident that the Department of Defense and the Alliance are both doing everything that they can to ensure we have what we need. We're having to undo several years of decisions that were made on the best judgments at the time when we thought Russia was going to be our partner. The last American tank left Germany 3 years ago. We had no tanks here because nobody could even envision why you would need them here anymore. Our aviation brigade significantly reduced. And by the way, all of our allies have done the same thing. Now, with Russia's aggressive behavior, everybody realizes that Russia only respects strength, so you have to bring back capability.
Are we quick enough? Is the reaction towards the situation, and you said yourself, the Russians are changing the security environment. What is the necessary response to that?
So
are we doing enough?
I was very happy with the outcome of the defense ministerials this past week in Brussels, where everybody from Secretary General Stoltenberg, General Scaparrotti, our defense minister, Secretary Mattis, addressing the things that need to be done to continue to improve the deterrent capability, making sure that the alliance is adapted to the new security environment. So actually, I'm extremely optimistic by that. I also see improved cooperation or expanding cooperation between NATO and the European Union. This freedom of movement, or I would say military mobility across borders, is a perfect place for cooperation between the EU and NATO. So I'm much more optimistic about that
Let's
as well.
speak about realities. 2007, Russia aggressed Georgia. In 2014, only 3 years ago, Russia occupied Crimea, and you have criticized Moscow for having troops supporting separatists in eastern Ukraine as well as for its annexation of Crimea. But your commander-in-chief hasn't been as clear.
So my commander, General Scaparrotti, has been very
Your
clear.
commander-in-chief, the President, Donald Trump, hasn't been as clear.
I thought he was very clear when he stood there in Warsaw by the Uprising Memorial and said, "We are committed to Article 5 of the Alliance." He pointed to American soldiers that were standing there next to him and said, "This is our commitment," pointed to these young men and women as a manifestation of the commitment of the United States to security and stability in Europe.
He didn't criticize Russia as you are doing it. Donald Trump has stepped back from delivering military aid to the Ukraine.
Well, we have not stepped back from delivering military aid. We have 250 American soldiers that are in Ukraine right now, helping to train Ukrainian troops. Hundreds of millions of dollars of supplies and equipment have been provided. We just delivered a large number of frontline ambulances for the Ukrainian army. So the decision on any additional aid, of course, that's a decision at that level, but I think the right people are working on it. And we're not alone. We have Canadians.
What is your advice for the people who are working on it? More?
So General Scaparrotti has given the best professional military advice based on his assessment of the situation. He's given me the chance to speak to him, and I think that's where it's best left, is between General Scaparrotti
General,
and the
is
Secretary.
President Trump too soft on Russia?
I'm not going to comment on the president's.
We speak about military actions.
Right.
Is he too soft on Russia from your point of view as a general?
So I would say, watch what we do. The president has authorized the deployment of rotational armor brigade combat team, rotational aviation brigade, prepositioned equipment, with the support of the Congress, an increase of $1 billion of what we call European Deterrence Initiative money. From the previous administration to now, an increase of $1 billion. So more exercises, more capability, more available funding. That's what I look at. And to me, that is a powerful, strong manifestation of commitment. So this is not a black and white math problem. This is about deterrence. Everybody, you heard Prime Minister May, she spoke last night. Everybody would like to have cooperation with Russia as a responsible member of the international
But
community.
that needs to accept the annexation of Crimea, because as long Russia is doing that, I don't imagine that the American president or whoever will have better relationship with Putin.
That's probably the way it's going to be. The U.S. position is not to accept the annexation of Crimea.
But then help me a little bit, and I want to understand. The White House has also delayed implementing sanctions against Russia. Is this a strategic mistake?
Yeah,
And you mentioned the Europeans are doing it.
I think this is so important that the European Union continues those sanctions.
Would it help that also the United States will follow the Europeans about sanctions against Russia?
I think the cohesion of the alliance is the most important factor of deterrence. And that's what I saw coming out of the defense ministerials last week. You know, our great Secretary of Defense and General Scaparrotti and the other leaders of the alliance, so unified. To me, that's what is most important. And so I'm very satisfied with that.
So let's speak about these things a little bit more concretely. There are no signs that Russia is leaving Crimea. What steps do you suggest to force them out?
So I think I might disagree with you. You know, Russia has come up publicly and said, hey, we think maybe there ought to be a peacekeeping force here. Now, whatever that peacekeeping force looks like or whatever, the fact that they're asking for that, I think, indicates that you know, they don't want to see this last forever. I think that they were surprised, I think, by how well the Ukrainians have fought. I think the Russians were surprised how the entire West has stuck together on this with
General,
sanctions.
3 years after the annexation, sanctions as we discussed, a lot of movements as you just mentioned. The fact is nothing changed. Nobody, it seems like that, has a policy to make this happen.
So how long do you think we've been in Germany? I mean, since the end of World War II and the division of Germany in East and West, we stuck with Germany, with the Germans, with West Germany for decades. Now, I don't know that that means it's going to be decades before Ukraine is reunited, that Crimea is returned, but I think the West has shown that we are willing to do what it takes to protect sovereignty and to protect democracy. And people in Ukraine, they saw how much better life was in Poland when Poland joined the EU and joined the alliance. People in Ukraine want that same choice. Ukraine's the only country in the world where people have died with the EU flag in their hand.
The answer is Russia is in the Ukraine. The answer is Russia is occupying Crimea. That's the answer from the Russian side.
Russia was in East Germany also, and they're gone. So
do you compare this?
Sure. I'm actually optimistic if we can all stick together. Time is not in Russia's favor.
You said that Russia could conquer the Baltic states, quote, quicker than we could get there to defend them, quote. And if this is true, it means that these states are not sufficiently protected by the United States or the NATO.
Yeah. So I think that was about 2.5 years ago when I said that, but I would not say the same thing today. And the main reason I would say that is the alliance rapid deployment of enhanced forward presence battle groups. In less than a year, from the Warsaw Summit in July last year, less than a year, German-led battle group deploys to Lithuania. Canada, back on the continent of Europe for the first time in years, in Latvia, UK and Estonia, and of course the United States and Poland, with Spain, Italy, France, all these countries together. That significantly changes the military calculus, number one. Number two, all three of those countries and Poland are doing exactly what they said they would do under Article 3 of the Washington Treaty, which says every nation is responsible for its own defense. So each of the Baltic countries and Poland have taken significant steps, not just increase spending, but to improve their own defense. So I would not say 36 hours anymore.
Okay, so no, 36 hours, so 50 hours, 100 hours? Are the Russians also today quicker?
I would say, first of all, that the Russians would think much harder about ever attacking one of those countries because of the unity of the alliance and the increased capability. But also, what I saw, again, coming out of the defense ministerials last week and from Ambassador Domek and the European Defense Agency, recognition that we've all got to be able to move more quickly. So I'm actually more optimistic now than I've been in 3 years.
What does it mean if you say, I am a little bit more optimistic? Who is winning the time war, Russia or NATO?
No, we absolutely will. There's no doubt about it.
The RAND Corporation described NATO assets in the Baltics as being so mismatched with Russia's that it was, quote, inviting a devastating war rather than deterring it. Do you agree?
I think the near unilateral disarmament and reduction in capability that we all went through a few years ago, that invited attack. So that's why we're all working as hard as we can to rebuild, reestablish capability.
Good enough?
Never good enough. This is deterrence. Is all in the mind of the potential
Better than
adversary.
the Russians?
When the alliance sticks together, we are absolutely.
President Trump says, apropos alliance, that one of the reasons why NATO is not strong enough is that European defense spending is too low. The NATO's goal is at 2% of GDP, but most NATO countries are not
Before you can
spending
increase,
this.
you have to stop the decrease. And so most nations, Poland, Romania, Baltic countries are all either already at 2% or increasing. And I would also say that, again, German leadership, Germany is, at least the Army, which is, with what I'm most familiar, the Army is led by General Jörg Vollmer, is got exactly the right focus on retooling the division headquarters that they have to be operationally capable, a good modernization effort. So,
but they are far away from these 2%. And Germany just said that the goal will be fulfilled in 2024, 7 years later.
Well, that's what the nations all agreed to at Wales. They gave themselves.
And do you believe in that?
10 years, absolutely. If our ally says they're going to do something, they'll do it. And leadership of Dr. von der Leyen and the Bundeskanzlerin, I have huge confidence in our allies.
One of the reasons why President Trump said NATO is obsolete is that what we're talking about. Many politicians in Europe, like President Macron of France, have called particularly after this remark for United European Defense Cooperation. Some even say the European needs its own army. Do you think that the European army would compete with NATO for resources?
So NATO is the best organization for collective security. But what we've always needed and wanted is, of course, a strong European pillar inside the alliance. And I think what I have read about this European defense identity actually will do a lot to help improve efficiency in growing capabilities of our European allies. I don't think that the vision is a separate force that competes with NATO, but instead a more efficient and effective European contribution to collective security, but which would also allow Europe to do things perhaps in Africa or whatever that are important to them.
Is this a good idea to have a European army?
I think NATO is the right answer.
So the European army is the wrong answer?
NATO is the right answer for collective security, but it needs a stronger European pillar. And so
in NATO
I think,
or outside NATO?
Well, I don't think it has to be either or. I mean, each of us does things bilaterally, multilaterally with other countries. So it's not an either or. I'm satisfied that there's enough, that the smart leadership in Europe will figure out how to get the best efficiency from the billions of euros that are being spent, which is what Foreign Minister Gabriel talked about, without pulling apart what makes NATO so good.
Is Europe today more secure or less secure than 10 years ago?
Seems like there are more threats now than there were 10 years ago. The Islamic extremism obviously is a real concern, and but I see the nations working harder together to close those sort of gaps. Intelligence sharing is as good as I've ever seen it, but we don't get to choose our threats. Of course, Islamic extremism, Russia's aggression. There are other threats that are out there. So, seems like more threats that we have to be prepared for.
To be prepared also for a war in Europe?
It's not
Is
inevitable.
this possible?
Well,
Thinkable?
deterrence is all about demonstrating capability and demonstrating the will, but war is not inevitable. It doesn't have to happen.
General Hodges, thank you very much for being on Conflict Zone. It was a pleasure.
Yeah,
Thank
Michel,
you.
I think I
Thank
learned some stuff today. Thank you.
you. Thank you. Pleasure to meet you.